Good evening. I would like to thank 92nd Street Y for inviting us to participate in this evening just before Israel's 75th Independence Day. I will start with a story, short story. 6 months ago, I sat in the living room of Aaron Barak. Aaron Barak, former president of the Supreme Court in Israel. Some see Barak as hero, Holocaust survivor, the father of the human rights. For others, he is an enemy, the one who destroyed the judicial system and gained too much power for himself. Some ministers in these days in Israel even dream to see Aaron Barak behind bars. Barak is known to be an interview refuser, so when I offered him an interview, he told me, first I will tell you my life story, and then we'll see. Just to remind you, Barak is 85 years old, so I prepare myself for a long story. Our first meeting took place a few days after the elections. In the background, there were already talks about far-reaching judicial reform. There were 3 issues, Barak said, in their campaign that if they come true, Israel will cease to be a democracy. But don't worry, Roni, don't worry. That will never happen. Netanyahu will never do it. A few months later, at our 8th meeting, Barak's phone kept ringing. We have turned on television the Minister of Justice holding a press conference. Together we sat and watched Yariv Levin, Minister of Justice, announcing his new plan, which included all the points Barak was afraid of. This evening, one good thing and one bad thing happened to me. Israel's democracy was shaken, but I earned one of the most important interviews of my life. So this evening, we will try to understand the future of democracy among other burning issues regarding Israel with truly phenomenal panel. So please welcome the New York Times and Sapir's Bret Stephens, best-selling author and award-winning journalist Ronen Bergman, Haaretz Anshel Pfeffer, and Israel's Democrat TV anchor Lucy Aharish. So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. To start, can you share with us a moment, an image from your own Israeli experience that will shed some light on the question I'm sure all the audience here asking themselves this evening? What the hell is going on with Israel? One moment, human moment. Ronen.
So first of all, thanks so much. Honored to be here. When Susan, the czar of the Y, asked me to come a few months ago, I said, yes, of course. She said, this is a special evening for the Israeli Independence Day. I said, well, of course, we'll have many things to discuss, and I didn't dream that we'll have so much to discuss. An editor at the New York Times asked me to say something about how do I describe those last months. And I said, if we get, so the editor and myself, into the New York Times time machine, Bret knows that, we have the equipment, we have the technology, and we go 6 months back, just 6 months, to the very near past, and we go to 100 Israelis, and we tell them, we come from the future, and we tell, from the near future, and we tell them what would happen in the next 6 months. 100 will tell us, you are completely insane. There's no way in the world that something like that, everything, bad things and good things, none of that, no one would believe. And I think that the first person who would be overconfident that this will not happen would be Benjamin Netanyahu, who initiated all of that. And to choose a moment, it was that Sunday when Netanyahu fired Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense. And I was busy reporting. Then 2:30 a.m., Yana, my wife, who sits here in the audience, and myself, we were with the demonstrators on Ayalon Highway, which was completely blocked, dozens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and they were singing together the Hasidic song, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר מאוד, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. The most important thing is have no fear. And for me, this was the most important emotional and breakthrough moment. And after that moment, the morning after, or the evening after, Netanyahu said he's holding. Now, it's not a clear victory for the demonstrators, but that evening changed everything.
It was an historic evening. We'll talk about it later. Anshel, one moment.
I want to go back to the very beginning of the protests. Well, not exactly the very beginning, but the second weekend. And every weekend, every Saturday night, when the protests begin and people go to Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv and dozens of places around the country, we say it's week 16. I think this week was week 16. Every week we're numbering them. And before we started numbering them, the very first week was a terrible turnout. A few thousand people came to Tel Aviv. The opposition was divided. The protests were divided. One group were very left-wing, very pro-Palestinian solidarity, and they were waving Palestinian flags. Another group was, I'm sure a lot of you remember, there was the Balfour protest a couple of years ago in Netanyahu's previous term, and this was kind of like a hardcore protest group. So they were also doing their stuff, but they weren't agreeing with each other, and there weren't that many politicians, and it was split up, and they were going in different directions in Tel Aviv. It looked very bad. Then came week two. And week two, that Saturday, it was probably the first really bad wintry weather in Tel Aviv. And people were saying, it's raining. It was raining really heavily. Nobody's going to come. Last week was a shambles. It's not going to happen. And 60,000 people turned up in the square outside of Bima. And around the country, another 20,000 in various other locations. And that was, for me, was the moment and I remember I went to Tel Aviv and I thought, I live in Jerusalem. I thought, I'm going to Tel Aviv, I'll see some friends, I'll hang out. Maybe there'll be a protest happening. And I think the moment, and it was a very technical thing. I remember I took up my smartphone. I wanted to tweet something. It was happening, and there was no reception. The place was blocked, was packed with people. There was no reception because everybody was trying to post some kind of a photograph. Everybody was like, wow, we're here. It's the driving rain. And the other thing that happened to me at that protest, I was trying to get through this really packed because Malchei Israel, or Kikar Rabin, what was originally Malchei Israel, I'm sort of a generation which remembers Malchei Israel, is now under renovation. So that was the place where usually you do the big demonstrations in Tel Aviv. You couldn't. So it was really packed in Abima Square. And suddenly I was like kind of pushing my way through this press of people, and I bump into an 80-year-old man, Ehud Olmert, Israel's previous prime minister, who I've had and Bret knows this, a very uneasy relationship with him over the years of covering him, and many years he wouldn't speak to me, even kicked me off his plane once. And suddenly I felt, wow, I'm standing next to Olmert. We're both in the same protest. We're on the same, and Olmert kind of looked at me and kind of gave with a knowing glance that we were both thinking the same thing. We had never believed we would be on the same side in a protest. And that was the evening when I felt, actually, maybe we will be able to put up a fight. And I'm saying, yes, I'm a journalist. My job is to cover things and objective and all that. It's a we. We could put up a fight. We could perhaps block this attempt to eviscerate the Israeli judiciary. That was week number 2. That was the moment when I thought, there is something. This shell-shocked opposition, left-wing or liberal or secular Israel or Tel Aviv, what you want to call it, is coming back to life. That was the moment for me. And it was, and we have.
Oh, I'm going to be the party pooper of this group. I agree 100%, and I totally see, and I felt the same way, the way that you guys felt. But for me, the moment that I'm taking from everything that is happening in the last few weeks was a video that came out on social media a few weeks ago. I think it was 3 weeks before the Holocaust Memorial Day. And on that video, it was on one of the protests. It was a big strike day. And in that video, I saw 2 Jewish men. One of them is a protester, the other one coming out of his car. And the guy that came out of his car did the Heil Hitler gesture to the protester. Now I want to say the sentence again. A Jewish man did the Heil Hitler gesture to another Jewish man in the Jewish land. When I saw this video, I said to myself, oh my God. Because if this is happening in the Jewish land, if a Jewish man doing a Heil Hitler gesture to another Jewish man in the Jewish land after 2,000 years that the Jewish people dreamt of going back to their homeland, this is something to be worried about. It's not only a judicial reform, it's not only a problem that we have in our government, it's a really deep problem that we have in the society, in the Israeli society. I think that I said to myself, there is a phrase in Hebrew that says, "Im ba'arazim nafla shalhevet, ma yagidu azuve akir." If the Jewish people hate themselves, what does it say about me as an Israeli, Muslim, Arab living in Israel? How you will find peace with me if you cannot find peace with yourselves. So for me, that was a very worrying moment.
Bret?
So for me, the moment happened not in Israel, but in the United States with a back of the envelope math calculation. I've been saying for years that in healthy democracies, the political fringe bends toward the center. Parties at the fringe seek respectability and therefore votes by moderating their positions. But that in recent years, it's the center that consistently has been bending toward the fringe. And this is not just a phenomenon here in the United States, but you see it throughout Europe. You see it in Macron's anti-immigration policies. One country after another, the democratic trend has been a movement away from the vital and healthy center towards the fringe. So the evening of Galant's firing, I saw, I think in the Times, but there was by one calculation, 700,000 Israelis who came out from north to south in the streets. So I asked myself, I wonder proportionally, what is that in American terms? So it equals 25 million Americans. Now, to give you a sense of the scope and scale of that, the largest single-day protest in the United States was the Women's March, which happened across in Washington, but in other cities too. The Women's March had 5 million. So the Israeli proportion was 5x. It's astonishing. It's astonishing to watch the center of a democracy gain its self-confidence, its self-belief, and not only assert its views, but actually win. Because what's happening now in Israel, for all of the problems, and particularly those that you pointed out so well, is that it's the center that is asserting itself, hopefully not too late, against the fringe. And at that moment, I just had an intuitive sense, this country is going to be okay.
I would ask one question about the center, about the reclaiming of the flag. How did it happen? They took back the flag to themselves. It was very smart move.
I think that the people, the overt leaders and the secret leaders of the revolt, of the protest. I think they learned few things from the inability of the left or center to win the last elections. Now, people think that the right was just had a triumphant victory, but actually it was 130,000 votes. That, of course, because of the coalition government, because of the way the system in Israel is built, it was translated to more mandate, more seats in the Knesset, but only 130, so it's more or less in the center. But one of the failures of the left and the center to win was because they only focused on Netanyahu. It was only about, we don't sit with Netanyahu, it's just about Netanyahu. So this is one thing that the protest didn't do. And of course, while doing that, they enable people from the right to come in. The second is to drop the black flag, which was their sign during the demonstrations, and replace that, reclaim the flag of Israel, which basically didn't leave the flag to the right wing. Then
but there were situations that you saw the Israeli flag in both sides.
Yeah, but it was too late for the other side.
I walk in the street and I heard two young people from the other side said they are from the other side because they have the flag with them. Yes,
and
it's
also,
become a
of course,
symbol of the
talking about democracy versus dictatorship. This is easy to understand. And talking about the chart of independence, all of that, this was simple, centrally made. This was not spontaneous. If anyone thinks this was not. One day, when the story of the protest is told, and we know that, and very, very efficient.
You know, I'm a first-generation Israeli. My father immigrated from Russia at the early 70s, where he experienced anti-Semitism. And he used to tell me every day, son, Israel is a miracle. This country is a miracle. And I ask myself, when we talk about tribes, when we talk about demons from the past, if something got broken in this Israeli ethos in the last few months. Who will take this question? Bret.
I'll take it. Look,
The American perspective.
you know, if I may say, Israelis need outsiders to tell you you're not as bad as you think you are. Part of the problem in our conversations about Israel is we tend to think of Israel as a Western European state that just happens to be on the other side of the Mediterranean. The truth is that Israel belongs to a generation of countries that came into existence after the Second World War. So its peer countries are not Portugal or Belgium. Its peer countries are Kenya and Indonesia and Pakistan and India. And if you think about what Israel's travails in that context, number one, you get to the point about Israel being a miracle. It is, and I've actually gone down the list, it is the only example of a post-colonial state that has succeeded both economically and politically to maintain a democracy and to move from the status of a developing country to the status of a developed country. That remains true today. Second point that's, I think, important to bear in mind, you had these vast protests, as I said, the equivalent of 25 million people. And yes, you saw those sites that were ugly and horrifying, and in any protest you will see this. But what I didn't read from the protests was mass vandalism. I didn't read that the government was shooting protesters in the streets. Nothing that I could expect to happen if this protest had taken place in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, never mind Russia, or for that matter, I'm sorry, France. Look at the status of France, and then you'll ask, when you see Israel in a comparative context, as opposed to just the great old line that Israel is the only country in the world expected to behave like a Christian nation, you feel better about it.
Lucy, you are...
I think that Anshel wants the answer, maybe.
Anshel.
Bret mentioned the fact that there was no bloodshed in the protest, and that is a wondrous thing. But on that very night that Ronen was describing before, so as I said before, I live in Jerusalem. I went to Netanyahu's house. Netanyahu lives, I'm sure some of you know, on Gaza Street. That's where his private apartment is, and he's still living there because the official residence is being renovated. And we were surrounding Netanyahu, the people who gathered there. This was already almost 11 p.m. On all sides, both the streets, behind there was a park opposite the apartment, and the neighbors in the same building, in the other apartments, were all on the balcony screaming at Netanyahu, who wasn't even in the house. But that's another. And it was one of those moments, and I've covered. I covered the revolution in Cairo and in Tunisia and in Ukraine, in Maidan, and some other very violent places. And it was one of those moments where if the people who were there, and there were tens of thousands of people surrounding Netanyahu's house, the Shin Bet and the police had not realized in advance what was going to happen. There was a handful of Shin Bet bodyguards there and maybe a dozen police. There was 2 horses, two mounted police horses, didn't know even which direction to point, to stand in, and 1 water cannon, which after 10 minutes ran out of water and foam. And if Mrs. Netanyahu and probably at least one of the sons were in the apartment. And some people here perhaps remember Romania and Ceausescu and those scenes by now 35 years ago. And there was a lot of anger there. It was the biggest, Bet said 700,000 people. It was the biggest protest, and it was the only protest which hasn't been planned in advance. These were people coming out. It was 9 p.m., the announcement of Gallant's firing. Within an hour, these hundreds of thousands of people were out on the street. Sorry?
Gallant, not guns.
I said Gallant, yeah. 2 hapless defense ministers named G. But who both of them are screwed over by Netanyahu. But this was a moment where this was one of those moments where the anger of people on the streets could have swept away anything, and I saw that happen in so many streets around the world. And yet, they encroached around Netanyahu's house, and they kept themselves back. The police didn't keep them back. Yes, the police could have shot, didn't shoot, but it wasn't the police keeping them back. It was an angry, but also a very. It was one of those moments, and yes, there are also these ugly things that Lucy's described, but it was a moment when basically Israelis took control of the streets, but did not turn violent, and it was in that sense. I can't try even begin to explain it, because every other place in the world where I've seen that kind of anger sweep the streets, it's ended in bloodshed, and it didn't, and that's a miracle. That's not just Israel's a miracle, the fact that these protests happened in this way, blocking a government, blocking a very powerful, this government came back to power with this massive field of vengeance and resentment towards the previous government, and the protests blocked that without any bloodshed, and that's an incredible thing, which I'm still trying to explain myself, but that is a miracle, yes.
Yes. Lucy, you are probably the one with the most complex biography on this stage. An Israeli Arab Muslim woman married to an actor, Tzachi Halevi, is a star in Israel from Fauda, and who is also Jewish. Tzachi served in elite army unit. Your marriage was a sensation, local Romeo and Juliet, but without the tragic ending. I hope.
I hope.
You too. So how has the reality in Israel these past few months affected you? Do you feel that you have place within the protests?
Wow. First of all, I'm attending when my husband is in the country and not filming in Argentina, for example, for 2 months. But I'm attending the protests each and every week. And yes, it's complex. And as an Israeli Arab Muslim, going to the protest, you don't see a lot of Israeli Arabs taking place in the protests because for a lot of reasons. I think some of the reasons is that the Israeli Arab society in Israel feels that they are not being seen in general on Israeli society and in Israel society. And they feel that they don't have any place in the protests. Because when you don't see me on a daily basis, why you should see me right now, or you want me to take part in the protests. But when I go to the protest in the last few months, you know, I always said that I'm a really proud Arab Muslim Israeli woman. I always say that. I don't need symbols, I don't need anthem, I don't need anything to feel Israeli because I feel it, because I'm proud in my country. Until now. But lately, when I go to the protests, it hit me the first time when I gave a speech on the Memorial Day of Yitzhak Rabin a few months ago on the president's house. And at the end of the ceremony, everybody stood up and started singing the anthem, the Israeli anthem. And as you know, I don't know if you know or not, but Israeli Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Druze cannot sing the Israeli anthem because the Israeli anthem is talking about the Jewish soul and it's talking about
Nefesh Yehudi Homiyah.
Nefesh Yehudi Homiyah. A Jewish soul yearns, and I don't have a Jewish soul. And
Yes,
so
you do. Okay.
Well, sometimes I act a little bit Jewish, but you cannot just sing it. And I think that at that point, when I was in the president's house, everybody stood up and started singing, and it was the first time in my life where I stood up, and I'm always standing up in the anthem, and I'm always respecting, but it was the first time that I actually cried. I cried because I really wanted to be part of that moment, and I couldn't. And in the protest in the last few months, every protest starts with the anthem. And you can hear all the Israelis singing together, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of Israelis singing together with the Israeli flag, with Israel's flag. And I cannot be part of it. And I cannot actually be 100% part of it. And my husband stands next to me and he sings it and he looks at me and I just like, you know, I have a heartache not being able to be part of this. So like I said, I'm going to be the party pooper of this panel, but I'm also optimistic because I have a son. His name is Adam. And half of his soul is Jewish. So he is able to reclaim his Israelishness, we can call it, and reclaim my place in the Israeli society, and actually claim his place in the place where I didn't feel that I belong. He will belong. He will belong. So I think that I'm doing my correction through my son, fortunately.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about what is going about with Benjamin Netanyahu, the man who for years skillfully navigated between the home base and the international public opinion, balanced extreme voices in his camp while gathered Israel's best interests, even the relationship with the US. So how did he let this happen?
Ronen.
Ronen, you have few talks with him, so tell us.
Ronen has a better rapport with him.
Better relationship with Netanyahu.
Try,
Yes.
please, to explain Benjamin Netanyahu. Please try to explain him.
Netanyahu is not known to be a big fan of the New York Times. And he doesn't like me so much either. But 3 years ago, I think it was the first for maybe a decade or decade and a half, that he accepted the New York Times reporter for an interview. This was a cover story that Mark Mazzetti, our national security correspondent in Washington, and myself did for the New York Times Magazine about Iran and the debate between the Obama administration and the Benjamin Netanyahu government about whether to strike Iran back 10 years ago or not. So I thought to myself how I'm going to maybe start the interview in a better sort of atmosphere. And I marked one page in a book I wrote in that specific page that says good things about Netanyahu, coincidentally. And I gave him the book and I said, you know, Mr. Prime Minister, maybe look at this page. Netanyahu, who is not completely nonchalant towards good things said about him in the media, was very happy. But I think that from the conversation I had with him, that one and a few others, it seems to me that there's a growing detachment from some parts of what is happening outside his palace or his office, and a growing despise towards anyone who says anything bad about him or his family. And I think that that detachment led him to have no forecast, no ability to assess that he's now making the biggest mistake of his political career. And I think this is where I think if he could take the New York Times time machine and go back, but reverse everything, he would do that with no hesitation.
Bret? Anshel?
I mean, it's, as Ronen said, it's obvious that he made a mistake. Why does somebody so canny, someone who has always had his finger on the pulse of Israeli society, someone who's amassed, and you know, I'm sure everybody here in this room has seen many Netanyahu speeches, a master communicator. How did he fail at communicating this plan? This plan has been the main policy of his government. You know, he returned to power 4 months ago. This has been the only policy of his government, and he's failed completely to have any kind of communications program. Now, people around him, not his inner circle of advisors because they're all sycophants, but the people who are slightly wider circle of Likud and coalition are asking the same question. How did Bibi do this? And people who support him, people who support the judicial overhaul have been asking themselves, there are all kinds of reasons. He was actually outmaneuvered by Yariv Levin, the just minister, or it's his crazy son who is now, has just been exiled to Puerto Rico, or, and there's some clever explanations. Netanyahu is not one of, I mean, Americans are very big in constitution, and you expect your presidents to be, except the last president, to be big on this kind of thing and to know how it works. And Netanyahu is a very clever guy, but he's into Iran, he's into security, he's into diplomacy and to macroeconomics. He's never been into the Israeli constitution. He doesn't care about it. He thought it was a technical thing. He was, as Ronen said, detached from it. He thought, okay, they'll change a few laws, they'll move a few judges around, big deal. You know, I've just won a massive election. No, who's going to stop me? And that was a massive misjudgment of the Israeli mood, which I thought he hasn't even begun to fully. I mean, Bret said quite rightly he would try and Ronen said that he would try and take it all back. I don't yet think he's yet fully understood. I think he only understood it when he began his recent talks with the credit rating agencies, which is a crazy thing. A head of state or a prime minister is not supposed to speak. Am I right? To credit agencies, it's not the kind of thing that you send the prime minister to do.
I mean, if you're the prime minister of St. Kitts, you would speak to the rating.
Which is basically a bank account with a seat in the UN. I mean, it's not something he's supposed to be doing. And suddenly he found himself doing this and speaking to these top economic people, and they're telling him, what the hell are you doing? I mean, some of these conversations have been very rough for Netanyahu. And that has only kind of brought it back to him, because he couldn't conceive of the fact that after winning an election, suddenly hundreds of thousands of Israelis, and not just those like hardcore lefties, but the pilots, the reserve officers, the tech community, Bibi believes that he is the founder of Israeli tech. He thinks that all these people who have made lots of money from their investments and from their exits, and so where would they be without me? And I've been in conversations, as I'm sure Ronen and Bret has as well, with Netanyahu, when Netanyahu says, why don't I get enough credit for Israel's tech boom? Now, Israel's tech boom, he has some part in it, but it's a proportion. And he still can't grasp what's been happening in Israel in the last few months. And that is a fascinating thing to see. Netanyahu, who has always had the measure of the Israeli public, suddenly just totally lose contact with Israeli reality.
Can I just add something? In one small thing, gentlemen, his legal issues. That's it. His legal issues. The Benjamin Netanyahu of 2015 is not the Benjamin Netanyahu of 2018 and 2019. His legal issues changed his course and changed the discourse in Israel. And I think that the Israeli prime minister who is dealing with legal issues with the judicial system in Israel brings him to, let's say, to the point that we're watching right now and we're experiencing right now, to see a prime minister that is going on a direct agenda against the judicial system in Israel because of one specific issue, his legal problems. That's it. And I believe that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to end his historical career behind bars. He doesn't want it. And maybe...
No, I mean, the story of Netanyahu reminds me of a slightly off-color joke, which I'll tell here anyway. So a traveler is traveling in a faraway country, and he comes to the top of a little hill. There's a beautiful vista of a gorgeous seaside village, little white houses, and boats, an anchor in the harbor, and it's just very picturesque. The traveler notices there's an old man just sitting next to him, just contemplating the village. So the traveler sits down, offers the old man some water, and at length the old man says, "Stranger, behold yonder village. Did you notice all those boats laid up at anchor? I built these boats with these two hands. Do they call me Mikas the shipwright? They do not." And then after another long silence, he says, "Now, stranger, notice that tall wall around the village which keeps out the thieves and the brigands at night. Do they call me Mikas the protector? They do not. I have sex with one sheep, and and that's basically Bibi, right? I mean."
Here's something to remember from this evening. The one sheep. Our audience heard a lot, you mentioned Iran, heard a lot about the Iran and the danger of its nuclear program. What happened to Netanyahu, the great fighter against Iran? Is he suddenly more interested in other things?
I agree completely with Lucy. I think that Netanyahu, or the Netanyahus, so the Supreme Council, now lacking a member that is somewhere in the diaspora, but I think that they are keen to have two things. One is to get them off the hook of the legal process, and the second is to remain prime minister. Nahum Barnea, a famous columnist in Yediot Ahronot, he once wrote that most politicians have themselves at the center and all the rest in the background. For Netanyahu, he said there's no background. And I think that once he had those things, once Iran served his purpose, then Iran was, above everything. And if you hear the way he speaks about everybody else who also had some role in Iran, he says, who is that guy? Who is he that was chief of Mossad? Who is he who opposed me, who was chief of Shin Bet or whatever? It was all about Iran. Now, nowadays, I think he, maybe because of other parts of the Supreme Council, he lost touch, and he devoted all of his efforts into this one thing. And not to scoop myself, but there will be a report that will indicate and identify the ways that the enemies, report in the New York Times, the ways that the enemies of Israel sees Israel today. They see the weakness. The fact that Yoav Gallant that Saturday went to speak and knew that there's a chance he's going to be fired was because he read the intelligence that Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, and Khamenei in Iran, they see Israel, they feel that this is the weak time that they can launch an attack, reshape, test the water, reshape the rules of the game. And Netanyahu neglected all of that to achieve those two goals.
And I think that there is one thing that that night, what you said about Yoav Gallant is so correctly, because there is a huge political, like a geopolitical situation happening in the Middle East, and maybe you will agree with me, Ronen, about that, is that let's say the reconciliation of the Shiite Muslim world with the Sunni Muslim world in the region is a huge thing happening in the Middle East. This is something big that is not in favor of Israel. And I think that Yoav Gallant at that point knows that Saudi Arabia getting closer to Iran, Saudi Arabia getting closer to Syria, everything that is happening in the Muslim world. I think that Gallant, head of security in Israel, understand that we are in a really, really delicate situation in the Middle East. And I think that the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu that night, deciding to fire the defense minister only because he said something that he didn't like, it was, I think, one of the most lack of responsibility that any prime minister in the history of Israel ever had.
We have some questions from the audience. What are your thoughts on the blunt no that Biden replied with a reporter asking if he will invite Netanyahu to the White House, and when we will see Netanyahu in the White House?
Oh, we should.
Look, one of the ways in which I fault Netanyahu is I think that his government and a strain in Israeli in Israeli politics has convinced itself that it can do without American support. That Israel is now a very strong country, that it's built bridges with Middle Eastern states that it hadn't had ties with before, and that it can live outside of the protective embrace or maybe shadow of American power. And I think that's a serious strategic miscalculation. And it may be that in the list of Netanyahu's grave mistakes, that will wind up ranking very high. On the other hand, I am worried about the extent to which President Biden seems to be, and I think he's actually been pretty good on most of the important Israeli issues, and better than his not his immediate predecessor, but the one before that. I can explain that too. I think Biden is foolish to go along with the current in the Democratic Party that wants to dissociate itself with Israel. We just had a pretty good example of what happens when an American president does that. President Biden rightly dislikes all kinds of things about Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia suddenly discovered that it has all things to like about China. So it is foolish, just simply as a matter of statesmanship, to be too picky about those who would have you as their friends. And I think President Biden would be wise, especially now that the protesters may have won, to invite the prime minister and to not allow personal enmity to get in the way of geopolitical necessities. The United States also needs a strong, powerful, capable, democratic ally in the Middle East, and it's a relationship that he should see thrive.
Another question, is there anything positive about the proposed judicial reforms?
Yes. It made the civil society in Israel stand on its feet and roar. And this was, you know, this really fills my heart with optimism. And I'm not sure I agree with Bret that things are much better than it looks from Israel, because we were, and I still are, we did not, the protest didn't win, but we were at least on the brink of becoming a different country. And if it's up to those in the ultra-right, and if it's up to the Haredi ultra-Orthodox, and if it's still up to parts of the Likud, they would still go for that. The reason why they say they stop, it's not because they realize that this is bringing Israel on the verge of being a dictatorship, if not beyond that. You know, it's attributed to Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire. He said, last year we were on the verge of the cliff, and this year we made a big leap forward. So before we were on the brink, but looking at everybody in those protests, it means that the civil society, those that everybody said does not exist, the judicial reform, whatever you call it, it brought this to happen, and I think it proved how strong massive parts of Israeli democracy are.
You know, I'll make one brief positive comment. The idea of judicial reform in and of itself is not crazy. The judiciary in Israel is too powerful. And had this been conducted in a consensual manner, not an effort to ram through legislation on what really is a relatively slim parliamentary majority and not even an actual electoral majority, and had it not been done by the wrong people for the wrong motives at the wrong time, there would have been a powerful case to be made that some kind of compromise was necessary to rebalance rebalance Israeli politics so that the judiciary wasn't overweeningly powerful. You know, as I said, you know, Bibi had sex with this one sheep, and.
Another question, do you think these protests could be the start of an Israeli constitution?
Well, I think that when Bret says that it's too powerful, it's too powerful in the sense that a blind person's hearing is oversensitive because he can't see, then he therefore has to rely on other senses. The Israeli Supreme Court is too powerful because there are no other checks and balances in Israel. The Knesset and the government do not balance each other. Netanyahu always talks about the three powers, but actually the Knesset and the government are one and the same because of the way that the electoral system is built. And because there is no constitution, for 75 years there's been no constitution, there is no other way of somehow controlling government overreach, protecting minorities and so on. It would be wonderful if the powers of the Supreme Court were better defined and had a better basis. It's true that there was some kind of a power grab by some of the Supreme Court presidents, but it was done in a vacuum where there is nothing else. And the reason there is no constitution, there are a number of reasons why there's no constitution, is because our founding Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, did not want to be limited by a constitution, and he kind of let it slip in the first couple of years when the first Knesset was supposed to be drafting a constitution. And other Knesset members on his behalf kind of said, okay, well, we don't really need to do it. Let's vote that we can wait for it. And we've been waiting for the last 73 years. And in that vacuum, I agree, a too strong Supreme Court. But I think by necessity, a too strong Supreme Court has come into being. Sadly, I don't think we're going to have a constitution now because the same problems and the same divides exist that prevented it then. And perhaps they're even bigger now because we have a much stronger Haredi community, a much stronger national religious or nationalistic religious community. We have also demands from the Arab Israeli community for a state of all its citizens. And how can you have a constitution where we don't even know the borders of Israel, which is even a bigger problem now than it was back in 4950. So no, I don't think we're going to, sadly, I don't think we're going to have a constitution.
And correct me if I'm wrong, just when you say that the judicial system is extremely strong in Israel or powerful in Israel, just a small fact, since 1994 or 95, it was when the reform was done by Aaron Barak, only 22 laws were not canceled, but got back to the Knesset. 22 laws. And all these laws, since 94, 95, I don't remember the year exactly, all of them are about minorities and minority rights. So when we're talking about the judicial system that is extremely powerful in Israel, of course you need a reform. Every system needs a reform, but not like that. Not in this way, not from these reasons. Not when you are coming and basically erasing the rights of women, of minorities, of minority groups in Israel. Not like that. You don't do this like that.
Many of American Jews who fell in love with Israel after Six-Day War now feel the generational gap. How can we explain the significance of Israel to our children, to our grandchildren?
I'll take a stab at the question. There are 4.3 million Americans who identify both religiously as well as culturally as Jews. Reform, Orthodox, conservative, whatever, they are fully in the fold of Jewish life in America. There are 8.6 million Americans, that is double the number, who had at least one Jewish parent. That means the attrition rate for the American Jewish community is 50%. If you go back 100 years, you'll find that the Swedish American community with its own Lutheran church, language, newspapers, community organizations was incredibly powerful. Where are the Swedish Americans these days? They've gone. They melted into that big pot. If we want Jewish America to survive, we cannot do without a powerful, vibrant state of Israel that not only embodies but produces Jewish culture and Jewish civilization. We here in the United States as Jews will dwindle to an insignificant and ultimately vanished minority, with the exception of the ultra-Orthodox, with that exception, unless Israel continues to succeed and thrive and represent what the great Jewish project is of this century and hopefully many others.
Two last questions. One of the reasons for resistance in the extended demands of the ultra-Orthodox leadership after the elections. Anshel, don't they understand that this could work against them?
They've understood that very late in the day. They were, as you said, one of the main groups pushing for the judicial overhaul for their own specific reasons, because they want to pass various laws, mainly the law exempting yeshiva students from service, and they want that law to be high court proof, that it won't be like one of those 22 laws that Lucy mentioned, that won't be returned to the Knesset once again for legislation. But they have realized in the last few weeks how much damage this is causing, because this has brought together what was before not a very coherent group of secular, liberal, and not just secular. You go to the protests in Jerusalem outside the presidential residence, and it's packed with Datim Leumi, with knitted kippot, with kippot zrugot. So it's not just secular, but it's a group which is not Haredi, and this is what makes this group very important. That the Haredim are not yet a majority; they're still 13%. Growing exponentially, but there's still a 13%. And this was a very bad moment for the Haredim to make a power grab and to be part of it and to basically warn the rest of Israelis that, as Ronen said, this is a different Israel that you're looking at if these laws pass. And now many, many Israelis are blaming the Haredim. And it's not a good place to be when you're a minority, even if you're a powerful minority, being blamed by the majority. So a lot of Haredim are now telling me, oh, we want to kind of climb down, but we can't climb down in public because the right wing are our allies, and many of our young people are hating the Supreme Court because we've been inciting against the Supreme Court for so long that we can't suddenly tell them, actually, let's leave the Supreme Court alone. It's not a good tactic. So they're stuck, just like Netanyahu is stuck. The Haredi leadership now in Israel is in a very, very awkward place and moment, and hopefully they'll be able to kind of do a tactical retreat because they're not going away. We still need, all Israeli society needs to be able to work together, and the Haredim are part of Israeli society.
Okay, last question. This one is a hard one. How will it end?
And they lived happily ever after, like Lucy and Tahi.
I part of it with Anshel spent some time in Ukraine the last year, and all of the Ukrainians I spoke with were confident they are going to win. They said, because we don't have any other choice. So, not to compare.
And because we're like Israel. Every Ukrainian will say, when they meet an Israeli, they'll say to you, we have to be like you.
Agree. And I think we don't have any other choice, and we are right. But it's also, I think, the proof of that civil society. I don't know how this will end. Practically, I think that Netanyahu doesn't have a way to solve that and remain a prime minister. I don't know about the judicial proceeding against him. I assume that there could be a solution that would pardon him and, of course, lead to major debate in Israel whether this could be or should be the result. We, Patrick Kingsley and myself, head of the Jerusalem Bureau of the New York Times, we interviewed President Herzog, who is running the negotiation, and he said, no one approached me. In order for him to ask for pardon, he needs to sign a letter, first to admit, second to ask forgiveness, third to ask for pardon. Nobody, not him and no anyone else on his behalf. Maybe it will be decided afterwards. I think Netanyahu, we are looking at the last phase of his political career. And this will, there will not be a judicial reform. But the fact that it's not just about Netanyahu seeking himself off the hook. There are other parts. The ultra-right want to have, destroy the Supreme Court so they're able to annex the West Bank and kick out the Palestinians. The Haredis wants to remain the ghetto and, continue to loot the money from the secular. It's going to continue, and this is the long-term effects. This is what I'm concerned of. In the short term, I think there will be a win to the protest.
I think we'll be back here in 25 years, and there'll be 100 for Israel. A couple of people here are about to be 50 on the stage, and maybe when we're 75, we'll also be here speaking to you. I'm actually very optimistic. I think that what we've seen in the way that the protests have succeeded and have come about, and in also the tactical retreats of some of the parts of the coalition, that there is an understanding that there needs to be a new type of a new type of social charter in Israeli society. It's not going to be easy. There's not going to be a constitution overnight. But we're already, I think, in the post-Netanyahu era. He's still the prime minister, but he's less and less the issue. I know he's a great person to talk about. He's fun. Some people write books about him, but he's still. But he's less. The truth is, he's less and less relevant to Israel's future at this point. As Bret said, he will be remembered as, what was that? Oh, yeah. And it's sad for him, but I think the point is that Israel is much bigger than any of its prime ministers, presidents, personalities, and we're seeing this in this day. And I think it's a good thing that Israel, though we've thought for so many years that Netanyahu decides everything in Israel, we now know that's no longer the case, and I think that's a reason for optimism.
I'm optimistic. I think that 19 weeks of protests, I think that Israelis may not go to the streets for the cost of living or the cost of gas or I don't know what, but they are going out to the streets for their country, for their democracy. Like, don't touch my democracy. You can touch anything, but don't touch our democracy. And I think that there is a huge reason to be optimistic because you see that Israelis are not willing to give up on this miracle. If we started by saying that Israel is a miracle, they're not willing to give up on this amazing place, that this baby, because Israel is a baby. It's 75 years old. It's not 200 years old. It's not 300 years old, 2,000 years old. It's only 75 years old. It's a baby. And they're not willing to give up on their baby. And I'm really optimistic with Israelis in specific. I just hope that throughout this process, Israel will continue with the United States being a bipartisan issue and not, unfortunately, being a very political issue with a Republican or Democratic one. And I think that this is a huge problem right now that Israel is facing with the United States, and this is something that we need to focus on, especially with trying to, if we're talking about a reform, to reform the relationship with the United States.
Bret?
How is it going to end? Look, I'm thinking about that.
Optimistic like the others?
Well, I'm thinking about this great scene in Woody Allen's, I think it's in Play It Again, Sam. He and Diane Keaton are walking through the Museum of Modern Art, and he sees this attractive female staring at this giant Jackson Pollock canvas, and kind of works up his courage, walks over to her and says, that's a beautiful canvas. What does it say to you? And in this sort of sultry, kind of German accented voice, she says, it restates the negativeness of the universe, nothingness, the predicament of man faced with a hollow existence, like a candle in the wind before the inevitable nihilism, death, destruction, and despair. And he goes, what are you doing Saturday night? And then she says, hang on. Then she says, I'm committing suicide. And then he says, well, how about Friday night?
And with Woody Allen is great. Okay, so Lucy, you are staying with us for additional short talk about your truly amazing story. And I want to really thank what a panel, Bret Stephens, Ronen Bergman, Anshel Pfeffer. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you. Woo. Okay, so we have a few questions with Lucy.
Let me try to get closer.
So,
can I get close, like
yes.
here?
Okay. So, Lucy, you are a journalist, news anchor, interviewer. I'm a journalist, TV host. We are about the same age, but I'm Jewish man who grew up in Ramat Gan, and you are a Muslim woman who grew up in Dimona, in the south of Israel. What can't I understand and perhaps will never understand about your life?
Wow. Well, I will tell you a small story. When I started my career 15 years ago, I cannot believe that I'm saying that it was 15 years ago. But when I started my career 15 years ago, it was on Israeli Channel 10. And the first few weeks that I went to the office, to the studios, I met Guy Zohar, who was one of the big anchors, news anchors in Israel. And I got into the studio, and he told me, wow, Lucy, you are Arab, you're Muslim, you are a woman, you're coming from the periphery of Israel. You are like from Dimona. I grew up in Dimona, which is a really, really small town in the south of Israel that, according to foreign press, we have a certain facility there. I don't know what. Ask Ronen. Ronen knows better than me. But, so you're coming from the periphery of Israel. You're like all the don't do in one person. And he told me, you broke like every glass ceiling that you have above your head. And if it wasn't funny, it was sad. But it is. I think that being an Arab Muslim woman coming from the periphery of Israel, growing up in the periphery of Israel as the only Arab child in Jewish schools, it's a little bit of a different journey than yours,
Yes.
I think. And you're more privileged than me
Yeah.
in one way or another, I think. Although a lot of
little
people are
bit.
saying that I'm a privileged Arab, so I don't know. Just I'm trying to look for the privilege part yet.
You know, for me, you are one of the bravest, most refreshing voices on screen. Did you experience more insults from Jewish interviewees or Arabs?
Wow. I can say from both. Like, you know, people ask me, like, who are the politicians who are not willing to come to your studio or to have an interview in your studio? And I say always, it's Likud members, Likud party members, and the Arab joint list. Everybody else are coming and giving interviews. I think that I make people sometimes move in an uncomfortable way in
But
their
it's
chair.
not because your personality, it's because your biography, your history.
I don't know if it's
And it can happen
combination
live
of-
in front of everybody in your studio.
Yeah,
You know, share with us one difficult moment.
I think that one of the most difficult moments that I experienced on TV, and I experienced few, especially when you have to interview some really disgusting people. It was when I interviewed, and I didn't know who he was. I interviewed Benzi Gopshten. I don't know if you know who he is. Benzi Gopshten is the head of the Lehava organization, which is part of Ben Gvir organization that he was connected to. The Lehava organization is the organization against assimilation in Israel. And I didn't know who this guy was. And I remember that I had a phone call from my editor the day before. He told me, well, Lucy, listen, Benzi Gopshten is coming to the studio tomorrow. And I told him, who is he? And he told me, well, Google him. And I Googled him, and I said, oh my God. Really, really disgusting. Yeah, really disgusting. But I said, okay, what will happen? I cannot cancel the interview on 11:30 at night. I will let him come. And he came to the studio. It was on the days of Operation Protective Edge. It was right after the kidnap and murder of the 3 boys and the kidnap and murder of Mohammed Abu Khder. And he sat down in the studio, and I had a panel discussion show. And for, I think, 15 minutes, he just spoke his fascist Nazi ideas. And I was sitting there in shock, but not saying anything. And my editor in my ear is telling me, Lucy, don't say anything, don't say anything. Don't respond, don't say anything. And after 15 minutes, I told him, okay, are you finished? He told me yes. I told him, okay, can you tell me, you are a person wearing a kippah, you believe in God? He told me yes. I told him, okay. You have a heart, I have a heart. He told me, yes. You have legs, I have legs. You have hands, I have hands. He told me. So I told him, so what is the difference between the two of us? He told me, I am Jewish and you are Muslim Arab. You have 22 countries and I and the Jewish people have only one country, and you will end up out of here, out of Israel. And I remember looking at him, and the only thing that I said is, we'll live and see. He got out of the studio, and I just started crying.
In front of the camera, live?
No, just we went on a break, and I started crying. But I wasn't crying because what he said, because I'm really, really used to people telling me that I'm filthy Arab and that I'm a terrorist and that I am, you know, really horrible things, and they're wishing me to get cancer and to just, especially in my throat, so I won't be able to speak. Really, I'm used to these things. But the hate that he had in his eyes, looking at me, was the same hate that I saw going through a terror attack in the Gaza Strip from the terrorist putting 2 Molotov cocktails inside our car when we were in the Gaza Strip.
You were just 5 years old then, yes?
Yeah.
Your family was in a terror attack. What does such an experience do to a child?
It fucks you up. It's, I think it was one of the, I thank God that it happened. And on the other hand, it's something that no child should experience. Nobody should experience such a horrible experience as a terror attack. Because this is why when people are telling me today, you support terrorists, you are not going against terrorists or against terrorism, I laugh. Because I say, how in the name of God you can say that I support terrorists after going through a terror attack? I think that it was a long story. We went to the Gaza Strip back in the days where Israelis used to get into the Gaza Strip. It was in 87. It was a Saturday morning in 87. And I remember going, my uncle came to visit us with his wife and his 2 children, and he said to my dad, okay, what do you think? Let's take a trip to the Gaza Strip. Israelis used to go and buy groceries and like do some Saturday trips in the Gaza Strip. And my uncle said to my dad, okay, do you want to go? My dad told him, listen, I heard that the security situation in the Gaza Strip is not that good. Let's postpone it. To make a long story short, we decided that we're going for this trip. Me, my dad, my uncle, my mom, his wife, and one of his children, a lot of people in one car. Like, we have this tendency, Arabs, to squeeze into cars. It's like every time you see like another one coming out of the car and another one coming out. It's like the grandma is in the bagage. It's like, and there is this word that karma, every single thing that happened that day just pointed out that we are not supposed to be there. So we went to the grocery shop, and the grocery shop was closed, and then we went to the beach where the fishermen my mom used to buy from the fisherman fish, and he was sick that day. And then we went to like this small clothes shop that we used to buy from, and the owner of the shop was just about to close the shop, and my dad is telling him, what is happening? Why you're not like, why there's nobody in the streets? And he said to my dad, well, you know, the security situation, etc. People are talking here about an intifada, but you know what? You made it all the way from Dimona. I will open the shop for you. And I remembered that every single time that I got to this shop, I used to ask my Mom, I want red nail polish. And she used to tell me, no. Why? Because in Arabic we say aib. It's a shame. It's not a good thing that a little girl has red nail polish on her hand. And that day I tried my luck again, and I asked my Mom, can I have red nail polish? And she told me, you know what, just take it. And I went out and I got back to the car, and they did a small, like, you know, round in the shop. They didn't find anything. They went back to the car, and just before we were about to leave, the owner of the shop looked at my dad, and he told him, just do me a favor, until you're coming out of the Gaza Strip, just close the windows. And my dad looked at him and he told him, what do you mean? Why to close the windows? He told him, you know what, just put something, put a newspaper, put a Quran on the dashboard, put something to show that you're Muslim, to show that you're Arab. And my dad told him, why? It's like, you never asked me this before. And he told him, well, you have a yellow license plate. People might confuse you, like an Israeli license plate. People might confuse and think you are Jewish. And my dad looked at him and he told him, Khali ala Allah, leave it to God. And we started driving, and we just hit traffic, and we were standing like in the center of Khan Yunis, I think. And I remember looking outside, and there was this somebody, like a figure, coming and getting closer to the car. And everybody were talking and laughing in the car, and I was looking outside, and I saw this figure, this really tall guy with really thin and had some scars on his face. And he had a necklace on his neck with the word Allah, God. And something was like, I was like fascinated by him, so I couldn't take my eyes off of him. And I looked at him, but at the same time I saw that he had something in his hand, and I didn't understand what it is, but I was also afraid, so I started scrolling down my seat. And my mom looked at me and she told me, Lucy, sit straight. And I didn't like listen to her. I just kept watching him and looking at him, and he got closer and closer to the car, and my mom is always saying, like, Lucy, sit straight. And the third time that my mom said Lucy, he looked me straight in the eyes, and there was a huge blast in the car. 2 Molotov cocktails, one hit, one inside the car, one outside the car. The other thing that I remember is my face hitting the ground. I'm lifting myself up. I see my mom crying. On the other side, I see my uncle's wife screaming. And I lift myself up, and I'm looking at my dad trying to put down the fire from my cousin that caught him, and my cousin going into flames. And the next thing that I looked for was, where is my red nail polish? I wanted to disconnect from the situation that I was in. From, you know, the look that the terrorist had, from his face, and since that day, I hated Palestinians. And I said, we should kill them, we should murder them all. And I remember that my extended family came and said to my dad, well,
there is a problem here.
yeah, there's a problem. She hates herself. She hates us. She hates who she is. And my very smart father said to them, when she will grow up, she will understand that life is a little bit more complicated than she thinks. And
but
he was right.
Before first grade, your mother taking you to a discussion.
Yeah. So just before, all of that happened just before first grade, and my mom, because she saw that I'm like really angry. She sat me down the day before I went to the first grade. And she told me, listen, Lucy, no matter what people are telling you, no matter how much you are going to be beaten up, because my parents already experienced that with my sisters, because we were the only Arab family in Dimona, Arab Muslim family in Dimona. So she told me, no matter how much people will beat you up, no matter how much people will curse you, will hurt you, I want you to always remember that you're Arab, that you're Muslim, that you're Israeli, and you're proud of it. Now, it's a huge conversation for 5.5 years old. That the only thing that you're worried about is like, okay, what am I going to wear tomorrow? And the next day you go to school and, you know, your mom said that you should be proud. So the teacher is asking, what's your name, what's your name, what's your name? And I was like, oh. She's like, yes, I'm Lucy, I'm Arab, I'm Muslim, and I'm proud. And the teacher looked at me and, okay, I see who's going to do some problems this year.
Because it was a Jewish school.
Yeah, and a few days after, I just started getting beaten up from the kids, and yeah, it was. So yeah, it was a little difficult like journey. I think.
Yes. And when you are growing up and you are leaving your hometown, Dimona, the one who left to pay the price was your mother.
Yes, my mom and my dad, I think. I think that my mom, I'm the luckiest person. Every child will say that about their parents, but really I'm the luckiest person on earth to have the parents that I have. They paid the price for every one of my choices and every one of my decisions. But I think that the biggest prize was when after I lit the torch in the Independence Day, in the 67th Independence Day in Israel, I remember that after that, my mom was not allowed to get into her mom's house because my extended family thought that it was an act of betrayal, what I did by lighting the torch. And they prevented my mom to enter and see her mom. And they told her there's no entrance to whores or their whore daughters. And for almost 3 years, my grandma was already really sick. She had Alzheimer's, and the only person that she remembered was my mom, and she always asked about her. And they didn't allow my mom to see her for almost 3 years. And just a few months before she died, my mom got the chance to say goodbye from her mother. So I think that my mom paid a huge price because of the things that I chose to do and my decisions in life.
And what was the reaction from your mom after all your life? She told you that you have to marry a Muslim guy. You have to marry a Muslim guy. When you tell her mother.
We spoke about it
Yes.
yesterday, and I told you, my sister got married with a divorced Muslim Bedouin with 4 children. So when I brought Tahi, who is an undercover elite unit officer who looks a little bit more Arab than me, she said, well, okay, just like, okay, whatever. She's really in love with him, like half of Israeli women and men in Israel.
So 2 last questions. Your relationship with Tzachi, the wedding, like I said before, was a huge story, even in the main newscast. There were a lot of difficult reactions, but tell us about one good one.
Wow.
One that moved you.
The day of our wedding, we were on the way to the wedding, and basically nobody knew about the wedding. We didn't say anything to anyone. The word about the wedding came out 2 hours before the wedding. And we only invited 100 people. For Israel, in Israeli standards, it's a really small wedding. I know that in American standards, it's a normal one, but in Israeli standards, it's very small. And on the way to the wedding, we got a phone call from back then Ruby Rivlin, the president of Israel. He was in South Africa with his team on an official meeting, and he heard about the wedding, and he called me, and he asked, and he wanted to congratulate me because we were very close, and I knew Nechama also. I got a phone call from his speaker, and she told me, Lucy, the president wants to speak with you. And I told her, what? What the fuck? I go, of course I will speak with the president. And he missed the call because he needed to get in with his entourage. And I thought that, okay, she told me, okay, he will try you later. And I said, no way that he will call and congratulate me. This is the president of Israel. Why would he call me and congratulate me about the wedding? And the day after, he was with Nechama. He picked up the phone. I saw the speaker's number on my phone. She told me, the president wants to speak with you. He now has the time. And then he told me, with his very, his voice, he told me, Lucy, dear, does Tzachi know how lucky he is? And I think that was after really hearing so many, we heard a lot of good things, but we heard a lot of bad things also. But that was something that I spoke with him and with Nechama. They congratulated us. It was one of the biggest gestures that anyone ever did, for me at least.
Okay, last question. You have that fire in you to make a difference in this world. In this roller coaster, this hot lava of conflict that is your life, share with us a moment of hope so we can go home with a smile.
First of all, my son. I have a son from an enormous love, from the love of my life. I got married to a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful man, beautiful soul, outside, inside and outside. I got
You have a chance to be a normal family?
People think that all the day we're sitting at home and talking about the occupation. We are not. Basically, he's right now taking care of Adam while I'm here, after I took care of our son when he just came back on Monday. And after 2 months in Argentina, where me, took care of our son, while he was filming a film with stars like in bikini and stuff like that.
Sounds like a normal family, yes. Okay.
We don't have the time to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we're not talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are a really normal family. We are like any other couple sitting, watching Netflix, saying, okay, today we're going to watch this movie. The minute the movie starts, one of us is just like gone on the couch. It's like, oh, what happened in the movie? We cannot answer that question. And I think that there's I will tell you something positive. I know that one of the biggest problems for the Jewish community here in the United States and in the diaspora is assimilation. And I know that it's a problem where somebody brings you somebody like me as the assimilation poster girl. But I'm not, saying that assimilation is the solution to everything. Although I have to say that, while you guys, when you marry one another, you're, in the holidays asking yourself, okay, did we do Rosh Hashanah with your sister or at our sister? Like, did we do Passover in your mother's house or at our mother's house? We don't have that. Your holidays is with your parents, and our holidays is with my parents. We're not fighting over it. But I think that it's very easy to live together. It's the easiest thing. Last Passover, Tzachi, just a few weeks ago, was in Argentina. And I did the...
Kneidalach?
Kneidalach. I did
No. Okay.
I did the Leila Seder, the Pesach Eve, at my house, at our house, because it was very important for me that Adam will experience the tradition and the holidays of his father. It was very important for me that Tzachi's father will have the experience of having Leila Seder at his son's house. It was very important for me to feel that it's very easy to live together. It's a matter of a decision. You have to decide that you want to respect your partner. You have to decide that you want to respect his tradition. You have to decide that you want to respect the human being in front of you, no matter who he is, where he's coming from, or what he is. And I think that seeing and watching my son, I have a video where his grandmother saying, "Mamu, did you took a picture of him with the kippah? With the kippah or without the kippah?" And 2 weeks after, he's sitting with his Muslim grandmother, and she wants a picture of him eating from her ma'mul cookies that she's making for Eid al-Fitr. I think that this is my biggest victory.
What a story.
Everything.
Wow, Lucy Aharish, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we finish, are there any questions from the audience? Someone want to ask something? Lucy?
How did I meet him? It actually goes back to Fauda. Avi Sacharo's birthday, 40th birthday. We met there. It was 10 years ago. This year we're celebrating 10 years. That 5 years out of them were in secret. Nobody knew that we are in a relationship for 5 years. So I met him in Avi Issacharov's birthday, and he will always be the guy that brought us together, that brought me and my husband together.
Okay, Lucy Aharish, thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much. Thank
Thanks
you.
to 90 Second Why. And of course, thank you all for coming. Have a good night. Thank you.